Recovery is stupendous.
Achievable.
Hope.
Freedom.
Empowering.
It's unique to everyone.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Getting a new lease on life.
Finding restoration after you fall down.
Recovery is having the freedom to enjoy life.
For me, it was finding a way to really love myself.
My recovery is possible in part because of my own sense of purpose.
Hello, welcome to Montana's Peer Network Recovery Talks podcast. I'm Jim Haney.
And I'm Andi Daniel.
Thanks so much for tuning in once again to another podcast. We're so happy to be with you. And today we are talking about the 8 dimensions of wellness.
Yeah, these are used all over the place. SAMHSA, of course, has some information about them, but if you do a Google search for 8 dimensions of wellness, you just get a whole bunch of information.
Yeah, there's all kinds of versions of this too. I think I've seen over the years the pie chart divided into the 8 slices. I don't know, I think for what we use at MPN is the SAMHSA one, which is the kind of the discs all overlapping, forming this circle. I think for the most part they're very, very similar. And really, when you begin talking about recovery, I think when you really begin talking about recovery and you say recovery is holistic, this is what comes to my brain right here. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. This just gives you a good rundown of the things that you can focus on, because I think sometimes that just seems really overwhelming about what's going on in my life and what do I need to fix. And so the 8 dimensions sort of give you a place to start. Exactly.
And if you're not familiar with it and you're listening, if you just Google 8 dimensions of wellness, boom, it'll pop right up and there'll be all kinds of stuff on there. One of the things that I'm going to mention a couple of times is our Healthy Minds, Healthy Bodies workbook, because half of the book is about the 8 dimensions of wellness. And so if you don't already have yourself a copy, you can go to our website, you can pick one up in the store. Part of it's about different elements of recovery, like trauma recovery, co-occurring disorders. Has a bunch of testimonies in it. That's kind of in the first half. The second half is all about the 8 dimensions of wellness, and we break them all out. And so we thought we would do a podcast on this and share our own thoughts and experiences about the different dimensions, how they interplayed in our own lives and how they interplay in our own lives. Because wellness and recovery, it's so much more than the absence of a disease or disability. It's recovery it's not just about not using substances or not hurting yourself, or it's just so much more than that. And I think that in the beginning, it's if you're having trouble with, let's just say, substances, I think it's easy to just focus on that and sort of get lost in, it's got to be abstinence or nothing, when in reality, and I wish somebody would have said this to me in the beginning. They didn't. I discovered this many, many, many years later. There's all these other elements of life that you can begin working on while you're trying to figure out what are your new healthy coping tools, right, instead of the substances. Am I explaining that? Like, no one really says that. I think the system, I know for me, like, if anybody has experience of going to treatment, outpatient treatment, inpatient treatment, it's about, don't do that. Don't stop drinking or if it's mental health related, like for me, stop harming yourself. Like, but it's like, you don't have the tools. Like, you don't have the tools. And I wish, in retrospect, somebody would have said, hey, there's all these other dimensions that you can work on while we're figuring out that part. And that I could have spent more time focused on some of these things. And so the 8 dimensions, and we're going to break them all down, but they're very quickly emotional, financial, social, spiritual, occupational, physical, intellectual, and environmental. There's a lot there, and you can start working on them, like I said, even when you don't have the healthy tools yet in your toolbox. You can start working on these. So maybe someday we'll get to that place where we talk to people this way, of more this holistic approach, because it's one of the guiding principles, and it's what we teach to peer supporters, that recovery is holistic, right? We watched that funny video about not about the nail, right? So learning to look beyond that. It's not really about that. There's all these other elements.
Well, and being able to focus on one thing at a time, I think builds your confidence too. If I'm not going to stop harming myself right now because I don't have any other way to cope with it, maybe there's something I can do about my nutrition, or there's something I can do about where I live, or, something like that. There are small changes that can make you feel like you have accomplished something, even though you haven't, gotten better, or for lack of a better word, right?
Well, you haven't figured it out loud, right? Like I can remember thinking, how do I solve this puzzle? Like, you know what I mean? Like, as if there was like some steps or some set of directions or something. Like, I remember a lot of confusion and not knowing where to turn, where to sort of start with it, where do you, and I think that, for peer supporters, the advantage they have is to be able to say, hey, I get it, and let's go work on, your physical health, or let's work on your, spiritual, but you know what I mean? Like, it's like you can kind of, it almost feels like a diversion, even though it's not. It's all of you. It's the whole person. I've said this story before. Very early on in my recovery, I was in outpatient. I checked myself into outpatient because I was drinking too much. And so it's like I couldn't talk about my mental health there. And then I go to therapy, and we're not talking about me drinking too much. We're talking about me harming myself. And it was like two separate things. And the two things were not connecting, right? But the two things are me, but they are me. They're part of me, and they're all interconnected in reality. And so, it was a long time ago, way back in the 90s. So I'd like to believe it's different. No one ever came to me and said, here's the 8 dimensions. But I think today, with the advent of peer support, and I think that peer supporters come from a different place and can say, hey, let's go take a walk, and, let's start there, right? And you mentioned diet. So maybe that's a good place where we jump in and talk about the physical dimension of wellness.
Yeah, I think physical is an easy concept to grasp, right? Eating healthy, if you're getting enough sleep, if you've got some good healthy activities. Sometimes I think it's an easier concept to wrap your head around. Am I physically healthy, or what can I do to make myself more healthy physically?
Yeah, I think when I think over the last 10 years, let's say, there's been this big push with dental care, right? So people with behavioral health issues, most treatment places now are talking to people about it. And if you look at community health centers, federally qualified community health centers, most of them have dentistry are part of their services, right? Because there's been this recognition that this is really important, right? And that people who, if you have a meth addiction, you probably have bad teeth. And that can cause tremendous physical pain, which only drives the urge to want to escape the pain and go use again, right? So, it all gets sort of interconnected. And so I think there's been this recognition that this is part of our wellness, and it's all part of the big picture. And so then services have to be created. I know here in Livingston, I mean, you can go to Community Health Partners, dentistry. They have the one day, it's a walk-in thing, and I think it's $25 or $30 for a basic exam, and to get you going. Yeah, I think physical and diet, I think that's another big one. Did you experience anything with your diet when you got into recovery?
Yeah, I started trying to, pay attention to the way I was eating. I get into those. Well, I have two different sides of this, that my stress levels. Like emotional stress makes me not eat, but like work stress makes me eat a lot. So it's sort of trying to find that balance between those two extremes of, making sure that I'm eating on a good schedule, or at least eating healthy things.
Yeah, and I think that, with physical wellness, it's one way to help yourself feel better, getting out, taking a walk, getting on a bicycle, riding a bicycle, going to the gym. There's places like the Phoenix in Billings where if you're in recovery, I think you need 48 hours, you can use the gym for free. It's designed for people in recovery. And I think physically, like that's the one for most people, not everybody. If you have serious physical health issues, you obviously are not going to jump on a bike or go to the gym or take a hike or something. But for most people, that's an easy one. And I know as a peer supporter, I would ask people that, like, hey, we can walk and talk, because just the act of walking is healthy for you, right? And releases these endorphins, and you get outside and you get some sunshine, and you're, right? So I think that's one that you can do. You don't need money to go to walk, right? So physical wellness is a little bit easier than some of the others, than say environmental wellness. And if you need to move from where you live, that can be more challenging.
Right.
You might not have, a deposit, first and last month's rent, a deposit to move somewhere. You might not have the money to rent a truck to move your stuff, right? So I think it's a little bit easier, than something like environmental. And then speaking of environmental, so it's not just about where you live, right?
Right.
There's other parts to environmental. And so, with environmental, we have to really look at our social circle, our friends, acquaintances, who are the people that we're hanging out with, right?
Yeah. Who do we surround ourselves with? What kind of energy do those people have?
Yeah. Exactly. Maybe it's your job, right? Maybe it's your job that is causing you a tremendous amount of grief and stress. You mentioned this with the eating, right? And so it might not be just your home when you're environmental. It could be people you're hanging around. It could be that one friend that always convinces you to go out and go to the bar and go get drunk, right? And right, like it can be things like that. And the other thing that I didn't say in the beginning is about how these are all interconnected, right? Is that they're all kind of overlapping. And so just right there, as I was talking about, well, that one friend that convinces you to go out and go drink, well, now that's connected to your social wellness, right? And that social group that you're hanging around, not a lot of sober, well people hanging out at the bar on a regular basis, right?
Yeah.
Or hanging out at a party. Or I think it's always good for people to have a nice mixture of social connections in their lives, right?
Yeah, which are totally connected to your emotional wellness, because if you're having to recreate some relationships, or move away from relationships that aren't healthy, how do you deal with that kind of emotional turmoil in some ways, right? That you're having to make this change to a different social group, and what are your emotions around that, and how can you make the best of that move?
Absolutely. And sometimes the one person that we consider our friend, and maybe we've known them a long time, so they're part of our social group. Maybe we met them through work, so they can be part of our environment that way. But maybe they're the person who's unhealthy, and they're bringing their negative energy and stress to your relationship with them. It's not about you and them, but their stuff bleeds over into you, and that's causing you emotional distress. But you don't even recognize it because you're friendly with this person since you were kids or went to high school or whatever, and now you're tied up with them emotionally. And unhealthy people can do that to us, and we can get triggered by it. But we have this loyalty, this sense of loyalty to the person, and so we're not even really examining that. But maybe they're working us up, they're upsetting us, we're feeling some of their stress, some of their grief, some of their trauma, and it could be triggering us.
Right, and then potentially guilty feelings about having to step away from that relationship.
Yeah. I remember that. I remember having to leave behind people who, at that time, I would have said were my friends. Today, looking back, I would say no, they were people who were unhealthy and weren't really benefiting my life all that much in a positive way. But it was really difficult because, I felt that sort of tug, and I was trying to change and trying to navigate the social aspect of it and the emotional aspect, and them tugging on me and me running to them and vice versa, and just not wanting to let go of that. And definitely connected environmentally, because if that's who the folks that you're hanging around, again, you work with them, you hang out with them, maybe they're neighbors, those kinds of things. It can be really challenging early on in recovery to do that, particularly when you don't know anyone else who's in recovery.
Yeah, I think that's really hard in smaller towns. Although you can isolate yourself wherever you are, right? And we kind of talked about this in treatment too. If you're in a hospital or in a treatment facility, you end up isolated from everybody around you. And so it's sort of like starting all over, I think, when you get back home or whatever. It's like starting all over with that social group and trying to find those people that fit into your life now.
Absolutely. And I think, speaking of trying to find these new things, once I got some time in recovery, I was able to rediscover things that I had lost when I was unhealthy. And I just had a conversation with somebody about this, about something that they were starting to do again, that they used to really enjoy, but they lost while they were sick. And so I think, considering your intellectual wellness, what are those things that you used to do, that you used to enjoy, that you haven't done for years? And if you really examine it, most of the time the reason you haven't done it is because you've been sick. You've been wrapped up in your illness, whatever that is, and you've kind of lost touch with some of those things. It can be something like reading books, taking the time to sit in a comfy chair and actually read a book. Most people, when they're unhealthy, don't feel good when they're not well, don't read books. So it might be something where you kind of rediscover, oh yeah, I really enjoy this, or I used to really enjoy this. Great way to expand your knowledge and learn new things create new pathways in your brain, right? Don't they say like learning a foreign language is one of the best ways you can expand your brain, flex those muscles?
Yeah, and doing puzzles or crosswords like Sudokus and things like that will increase your concentration and your memory and just help you think clearer.
Yeah. And we included some of those things in Healthy Minds, Healthy Bodies workbook. So we have crosswords and find words and cryptograms, because it is really true. Like, as you get into recovery and that cloud that most of us have from time to time will start to dissipate, and to expand your brain and think in different ways. And, you know, maybe it's taking a class, maybe it's learning something, maybe it's going on YouTube and finding. I've been watching these videos on how to these people building their own guitars.
Oh,
like the whole thing. You know what I mean? Like the whole thing, the wood, the string. You know, it's fascinating to me. Like, it's really, I'm like, wow, it's becoming like a whole thing. There's thousands of videos on this. Like, it's a whole thing. Like, you can just build your own now. It's like, wow. You know, and relatively inexpensively. I haven't tried it yet, but I probably will at some point. That kind of thing where you're just expanding your brain. Like, it's like, oh, never really thought about that. Like, building your own instrument. I think it's really important. And the other part of that is, when you're doing those things, you're not doing the unhealthy things.
right. Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the other huge benefit to it, is if you're making that switch from those emotionally draining friends, right, and you're changing your social circle, you're going to need to occupy your time with something. And so finding new things you can get into, get passionate about, you can learn about, is often a really good way to do it. And things like YouTube are just amazing because it's free. I mean, all you need is internet access, and you can literally look up anything.
Oh yeah,
and learn how to do it.
I fix my cars and my dryer and stuff just by finding YouTube videos. So
exactly,
you know, you can look at some of those things that, I mean, some of that stuff is easier than you think it is, right? So if you just do a little search.
Yeah. I too have fixed my dryer. That's funny. Did your heating element go out?
No, I had a broken belt.
Oh, okay. So my heating element went out, and it was literally $20 and 2 screws.
Yep.
It was the simplest thing. I mean, it was like, it took me longer to unscrew the back than it actually took me to replace the part. Like, I literally just went to the store and said, this is what I need. And they said, oh yeah, here it is. It's $20. And I went home, and it took me longer to, you know, there was like 15 screws holding the back plate on. And I was like, oh, there it is. And it's 2 little screws, popped them off, put the new piece on, boom, dryers. Found it on YouTube. And that kind of thing, that's just, you feel empowered when you do that. And so I think that's all part of that intellectual wellness and expanding your mind and learning. You know, it occurred to me when we were talking about the friend thing and the social circle and the emotional thing, we didn't talk about the financial piece.
Oh, right.
That totally connects in, right? I mean, if you're going out and abusing substances, you're spending a lot of money, right? Or if you're in mania and maybe you're hooked on Amazon, or I don't know, is anybody ever hooked? Are they hooked on Home Shopping Network still? Like, that used to be a big thing. Like, you know, Amazon makes it so easy to buy stuff, right? Like, you can just, oh, I like that. You just a couple of clicks and boom, 3 days later, it's at your door, you know, like.
When I knew somebody who bought a motorcycle in a manic state, she didn't know how to ride a motorcycle, but she bought one.
Nice. Yeah. That's just what you needed. Yeah. I mean, I think when you start talking about recovery, you do have to recover your financial self in that. I think for most people, we kind of bottom out our things like our credit score, our bank account, maybe our job, right? And there is a level of, whoa, like, this is not good. I'm paying the rent next month, and you have to start building that back up. But it's definitely part of financial wellness. I mean, even just keeping track of your bank account. Like, how much money do I even have in the bank? Knowing how much do you have? So examining, maybe it's you're going to examine your budget. Okay, I have a job, and these are my bills, and these are my expenses, and actually putting that down. Or maybe you put it in your phone. You get an app, budgeting app, and you're going to actually put it in to make a plan. How am I going to be financially well? Or maybe you did go crazy on Amazon and you bought all this stuff, and now you owe a bunch of money on your credit card. How am I going to pay it off? Do I need to go get another job?
Right. So that leads right into occupational wellness.
Exactly.
And having a balance, you hear a lot of times work-life balance. While I think sometimes a lot of these things, like intellectual things and occupational things, can sort of be a distraction, that's not to say that that's a bad thing, right? To find things to keep you distracted while you're still developing your coping skills. But I mean, occupational, we talked about maybe people that you hung out with are people at work. And so then how do you navigate that if you're not going to go out and get drunk with them on Fridays? Or is your work meaningful to you? And if not, do you need to make some kind of change to find work that's meaningful for you?
I think that's a big one, Andy. I think that's a really big one. I think it's more than just work. It's about having a sense of purpose. And so for some people, it might be going to school to learn, to get a degree or learn a new trade. It might be volunteering somewhere. Maybe, you're volunteering on a horse ranch or something, right? I think that having a sense of purpose, it's kind of like that keeping yourself busy thing. It's like, if you're really interested in something and you get passionate about it, it's like you're kind of so busy with that, following that dream, that you don't have time for the unhealthy stuff. And sometimes we can't control the unhealthy stuff, but if we have that sense of purpose, it can often be something we can hold on to and gravitate towards. And so that's another area I know for myself as a peer sporter. When I talk to people, it's one area that I try to ask them questions about and learn on a kind of a deeper level, like what's important to them, like what really is important and what matters. Because you have that sense of purpose, then you have a reason to get up each day and go and do whatever it is that you need to do, which can give you an emotional sense of satisfaction, right? It can help you financially. It can help you socially. It can help you physically by getting up and getting out. And then the finances help you maybe eat a little bit better, right? Like, I think like that sense of purpose is a really important one. And for people who are in jobs that they don't like, life is too short, I think, to do that. And unless it's temporary, unless you're just there temporarily, if you don't like your job, you really should begin making plans, I think, to leave there and go do something you enjoy.
And something that happened for me was, I had been working in social service kind of jobs, working with low income families and stuff like that for a long time. And I was pretty satisfied with that. And then things sort of took a weird turn in my life with divorce, and I ended up in inpatient treatment, and all kinds of things. And when I sort of came back out of that to some extent, I just wanted a job that didn't have a lot of responsibility.
Okay.
And it was only temporary. I mean, it was like 6 months. Yeah. I just need a job that I can just do and not have
Yeah.
to worry about supervising other people or,
Sure.
that kind of stuff. And I
Right.
loved it. I worked at a little candy store and I absolutely loved it. I got to be creative and
Nice.
stuff, but it doesn't have to be you don't have to be a CEO or something
Right.
like that, as
Right.
long as it's something
Right.
that works for you.
Exactly. That's a really good point. That it doesn't have to be forever. That you don't have to, do that, and you don't. And I think particularly early on in recovery, that I think you have to be realistic. That are you healthy enough to be the CEO?
Right.
Right? Like, I mean, maybe you have to start at an entry level position, at the front desk or administration or whatever. Maybe that's where you start, because you're not there yet. You're not healthy enough yet, and that's okay. As time goes on, hopefully your journey will be a positive one, and you'll get healthier along the way, and then you can work your way up or over to another position or a different company, or maybe get your degree, whatever it is. But yeah, I think that when you talk about job and then you talk about that spiritual element, that sense of purpose is really important and can be a really strong driving force for many people if they have one. I know when I wasn't healthy, I didn't really have a sense of purpose. And so, finding a sense of purpose and something that has real meaning to you, I think can benefit you in most all of these domains.
Yeah, so you mentioned spiritual. As someone who is not religious, spiritual is always kind of a weird thing for me. But people wrap spiritual up with religious a lot, and that's really not what that's about. It is having that sense of purpose, spending time in places that are peaceful for you, building your self-confidence, finding hope, and those kinds of things. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a religious or a higher power or anything like that. It's more related to your values and your beliefs than whatever organization people belong to.
Absolutely. Yeah, great point. Yeah, that's absolutely, because people do that. They will wrap up religion and spirituality together, and they're really not. They can be, but that's not what we're talking about. Yeah, it's like when I hike in Yellowstone and I get out, a couple miles, and you come over a little hill and like a ridge, and a big grassy valley opens up, and you see maybe a herd of elk or bison or whatever, or even a grizzly bear, just being a bear, just out in the field. It's like, man, that's like awakens something in me, very spiritual. It's like, realize, wow, I'm just this person in this big, beautiful world, and who knew what was over this hill? Like my whole world just expanded, and just, I'll stand there for, however long and just absorb it all, just, wow, this is incredible. And
I kind of feel that way, like on stage, being able to connect with other stories, other emotions, that kind of thing, really like digging into a character on stage, I feel is in some ways kind of a spiritual thing, being able to explore things that you wouldn't normally experience in your own life.
Yeah. And it's something you feel inside. It's like it's just some sort of feeling, just, I don't know, for me, just kind of overcomes me. And even every time I talk about it, I envision some of the places I've been when I felt that. It takes me like right back to it, and just, you look out and you go, oh my gosh, like this is just incredible. And to really absorb it, not just go, oh, that's neat, take a snapshot and keep going, like to actually be in the moment, to be present and feel the breeze and the grass and hear the hear the birds and just be really right there. It's something special. And if you haven't experienced that, go find it for yourself. And the way you find it for yourself is to get out there and,
try new
experiment.
things.
Yeah. That's how you find it. The 8 dimensions of wellness. I hope you've been a bit enlightened. If you've never heard of these, I highly recommend you take a look at them and consider it in your own life. And if it's something that you connected with, as Andy and I were sharing, again, we have a workbook called Healthy Minds, Healthy Bodies. It's available on the Montana Peer Network website store, and you can get yourself a copy. And we break out each of the dimensions and encourage you to set goals within each one to examine, how do I want to improve this one? And we give you a bunch of resources, and there's stories in there, personal stories.
And a little assessment to sort of show you where you are in each dimension and which ones need more work.
Yeah. And like we said, there's also there's like videos on YouTube, and the 8 Dimensions of Wellness are not, they're from SAMHSA, and so there's other versions of them, life balance wheels and things like that you can find. So just another element, another tool in the toolbox, another coping skill as you head out there in your recovery journey. I sure wish somebody would have talked to me about it a long time ago. Nobody really did, and I think you just sort of, mosey along and you're just working on whatever kind of comes your way.
Or being overwhelmed by all of the things that have to change.
Yeah, depending on how unwell things are in your life, right?
Yeah.
It can definitely be overwhelming. So, all right. Well, thank you for tuning in to another of our weekly podcasts. And be sure to check us out on social media and our website.
And our webinars that are every month are really, we're changing focus on those a little bit. And so they'll be for just recovery topics in general, not peer support necessarily. Yeah. So check those out.
Yeah, Realizing Recovery is our new name of our new webinars that we're doing. So 3rd Wednesday of every month from Montana's Peer Network. Well, thank you, and we'll catch you next time.
Recovery works, and recovery is possible.
Recovery works, and recovery is possible.
Recovery works, recovery is possible.
Recovery is possible.
Recovery works, and recovery is possible.
Recovery works, and recovery is possible.
Recovery works, and recovery is possible.